welcome to episode 124 of the Filmumentaries podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Benning, and as ever, you're in for about an hour of behind-the-scenes stories from the people who helped make the movies we love. Thanks for tuning in to my recent episode with Vicky Sampson, who gave us a crash course in the world of sound editing, ADR, and even stolen Return of the Jedi reels. I must get her back on the podcast because we need that story for this podcast. And it really felt like there were so many more stories from Vicky that we could hear about. Before we jump into this week's chat, just a reminder that you can support the podcast in a couple of ways. Head to filmumentaries.creator-spring.com. I'll put it in the show notes. It's a bit of a mouthful, that one. For some nerdy but stylish merch, I've got Irving Kershner t-shirts, ET sweaters, Filmumentaries mugs, all that good stuff. And if you'd rather support the podcast directly, you can do that at patreon.com/Jamie Benning or by the PayPal donation button at filmumentaries.com. And I believe that button now lets you decide whether it's a one-off, a monthly thing or an annual thing. So yeah. One $12 payment on Patreon supports the show for an entire year. And a huge thank you to those of you that already support the podcast. It really does help keep this going, trust me. And I really need more of you to support the podcast to be able to justify the effort and the time that goes into this. Right, on to today's guest, Jeff Okun. Now, Jeff has one of those careers that feels like a film history course in itself. He's been a visual effects supervisor for decades and came into the business via Saul Bass, of all people, learning everything from editing to shooting to compositing before digital was even an option. He went on to work on The Last Starfighter, Stargate, Deep Blue Sea, Blood Diamond, Sphere, and loads more. And he's got a wicked sense of humour, very dry sense of humour. He did want to be a comedian as well. He has an eye for invisible effects and a habit of sneaking moose and penguins into his shots. Yes, really. As I say in the interview, there really should be a YouTube video of this. Maybe after hearing this, you want to go and make that video yourself. So here's my chat with visual effects legend Jeff Okun, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. So Jeff, thanks for joining me today. What inspired you? What was your sort of early interest in movies and visual effects? And then how did you kind of translate that into something where you thought, this is how I'm going to break into the industry? Did it happen like that?
No, not at all. I'm a completely accidental human being. I had a very unique upbringing. I guess, what I wanted to be, I think everybody knows. I wanted to be a stand-up comic. Since my early ages, and I wrote out a really great routine on the pointlessness of God, and my parents were so shocked that I never did comedy in front of them ever again. They did not like that routine. So, but what's important to note for me is that my neighborhood. So I grew up on the poor side of Bel Air, which people have a hard time with that, but we lived in normal houses. We were by the freeway that hadn't been built yet, but, Mm-hmm. But to my right lived Andrew McLaughlin, who is a great director who did Gunsmoke and Have Gun Will Travel and a bunch of Western feature films like The Guns of Navarone. And on the left, I had eventually this composer named Jeff Alexander, who wrote scores for movies, and he invited me to go down there and watch them score a movie, which was intensely impressive. But I think, talk of rambling. So my dad was a dentist, and he was a dentist to the stars. And people that he dentaled on, when they had emergencies, they'd always swing by the house. So we had the likes of Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Tony Curtis, Lana Turner, Gene Barry, and Keenan Wynn, who I know nobody will know who that is was my godfather. His dad was Ed Wynn. If you don't know who that is, you need to look him up because he is the best comic actor ever. Okay. So we had all these movie star types coming into the house all the time, and we'd go down to Westwood Village, and you'd see somebody that I didn't know who they were, but my mom would go agog over it, and I tripped over their feet, and she would just be thrilled. And Andy, whose son, Josh, is like the first AD and a producer for, Jim Cameron and a bunch of other people, and his sister, is a producer who does really great films. So when I was young, I'm talking 5, 6, we had a fence between the two houses, and on a weekend, if they were having a pool party, you'd see John Wayne's head go bobbing across the fence, and James Arness, and then Richard Boone, and various other people. So I would go over there, and John Wayne would bounce me on his knee, and he would say to me, there ain't a horse that can't be rode, and there ain't a man who can't be throwed. And then he'd throw me in the pool. He'd bounce me off his knee into the pool. So I loved that. And then Andy's father was Victor McLaughlin, who won an Academy Award for acting. So 5 years old, I got to hold an Oscar. So given all that, I had a split major in life. One was money, and the other was trickery. So when comedy failed at home, I took up magic. And as I got deeper and deeper into magic, it became like, oh, I'm doing some really cool stuff here. And my dad had a Super 8 camera, and I would buy Super 8 film and use his camera without him knowing it. And basically I would do George Méliès kind of visual effects, magic cuts and a trick, double exposure, and then I would steal my dad's Nikon and go take pictures and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And then I would build model ships and get both cameras out, and I would set them on fire and then blow them up, And then one of my dad's friends was, my dad was a huge golfer, so he played golf with all these people. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a stunt man. And if you go back in the commercial world, he did Laura Scudder potato chips. It's like very, very old. And he drove the cars in, a lot of the James Bond movies. Anyway, and he would teach me stunt tricks. And so I'd get all my friends together, and then on Roscommere Road at rush hour, it's a shortcut from the west side into the valley, it'd be bumper-to-bumper traffic, and we'd have a fake fight on the corner, and I'd be in the bushes filming it, and we'd use ketchup for blood, and a number of times people would stop and get out of their cars to see if the kids were all right. So all of this tomfoolery, chicanery, made me go, wow, I bet there's something else out there. And so I gave up the search for money because I don't know why money was my thing. My kids will tell you it still is. I don't see it. Anyway, I think that's evidence. Anyway, but what's this? I have a dog at my feet. So it's hard to explain, but I ended up going to college, making a deal with my dad that if I got a degree in business, he would support me in entertainment until I could earn my own way. Now, I didn't know what kind of entertainment. I'd been an actor in high school. I was Felix Unger in Odd Couple, which changed my life forever because I became fastidious. Mm-hmm. But I had a straight A's in college, except for the acting class, because I accidentally turned my back. Well, it wasn't accidental. I purposely turned my back to the audience in a stage show to get off stage because another actor had worked so far to the audience. There was no way to exit and not look stupid, so he gave me a B and ruined my average. And I took a directing course from the guy who played Major Hofstetter on Hogan's Heroes, and he and I became reasonable friends, and he would tell me tales, and all the tales of John Wayne and James Arness and Richard Boone and all the rest about being on location and the bars and the women and the driving through towns in a stagecoach drunk and all these great things. And I just go, this is the life for me. So I graduated and I got a job with Saul Bass, who's a graphic designer. Most of you probably don't know who he is either, but at that time, he was the leading graphic designer in the entire world and invented corporate identity logos and carpets and walls to pull it all together. Anyway, and Saul had done films. He'd done title sequences in many films. He's the father of the modern title sequence. He'd made many short films, and I was his gopher, and I absolutely hated him. I just hated Saul, and he would always, I'd have to pick him up because he didn't drive, and I'd bring him into the office, and he'd go into his office, and he'd go, "Can you get a dying man a cup of coffee?" And I'd always bring him his coffee. And the things I put in his coffee, which he knew. But anyway, and so...
Was there a clash of personalities then? Like, he was just not your kind of person?
He was a perfectionist, and I was a gopher. And, to my point of view, what's to be perfect about a gopher? I change the water bottles, I get the donuts, I bring them his coffee, I do whatever they tell me to do. I do the shipping, I collect the mail, whatever. And Saul would go, coffee's not hot enough. He goes, I don't see you writing anything down. I need you to be taking notes. And I go, but I don't need to take notes. I know what you're telling me to do. And he goes, I feel like I'm on quicksand with you. Just write it down. And, he was very persnickety. But what happened is because I'm a fan of pushing buttons. If you have a button, I'll push it. And so don't let me near the nuclear ones. I got thrown out of more than one trade show for pushing the wrong button. But Saul was making industrial films, and there were a lot of buttons to push. And I met this producer for him named Gary Rockland, and I said, I really want to learn whatever it is you guys are doing. And Gary said, yeah, you could sit in any time. And I sat in with the editor and the assistant editor to see what the heck they were doing. And then they hired another guy named Larry Starkman, who became a good friend of mine. And Larry let me actually push the buttons and taught me how to work a moviola. And I was in heaven. You cut stuff, you're making magic. It's really fun kind of magic. And there's this story. We're doing the NBC's 50th anniversary television show, which was a week-long event, which Saul, for some reason, brought me to dinner with Orson Welles at Musso and Frakes to talk to him about him doing the voiceover for this sequence. And let me tell you, you really haven't lived until Orson Welles calls you up and reams you out. And for that fact, what was that guy's name? Otto Preminger. And Otto's also a famous hothead. And I get calls every morning from somebody reaming me out about something. And Saul would tell me stories about it. But what happened is that they had a sequence, it was on soap operas, and they decided to throw it away. And so I asked Gary, can I take a crack at it? So I took 6 weeks, stayed there all night. I did my job from 8:30 to 6 every day, and then grab dinner, and then edit. And then at the end of 6 weeks, Gary comes in and goes, hey, whatever you did, take it apart. They've decided they want to have the soap opera thing. And I said, okay, but do you want to look at it? So Gary looked at it, and he goes, wait right here. And he runs out of the room, and he comes back with Saul, and they look at it. Saul goes, who did this? And I said, I did this. And he goes, hang on a minute. And he got the NBC producer, who I think was Abby Mann at that time, Abby Singer, Abby Mann, one of them. He came in and he goes, hey, it's the first thing you showed me that's done. This is on air. And Saul said to me, well, from now on, you're my editor. And I went, great. I go, I'll hire somebody to do the gopher. And he goes, no, you're still a gopher. And you don't get a raise, but you're my editor. And I said, but Saul, I don't know anything about editing. And he goes, I'll teach you. And so over the course of the next few years, Saul taught me editing. He taught me post-production, supervision. He taught me how to record sound. He taught me how to frame, how to shoot with lenses. He taught me, with his sensibilities about backgrounds and foregrounds and depth of field. And it was a master education. And at the end of the time, I ended up loving this man. Not because he gave me the opportunity, but because he was so specific and difficult to please that when you pleased him, it was something. And I've carried that through my whole career. So back to your original question, and you thought this was going to be hard. The way Saul put together shots were all visual effects. He would shoot something like, a slow push in and then a slow pan left to right to left, a slow pull out, a slow boom up. And then we'd bipack it together with something else. And then he found, well, it's moving too fast or it's going the wrong direction or it's this or that. So I had to go to an optical house, which I didn't know what that was. And I went to several optical houses, Mercer, Pacific Title, several others. And everybody said, well, would love to do the job. And then I go, okay, so, here's the PO from Saul Bass. And they go, Saul Bass, we're out. We're not doing it. And Pac Title said to me, the reason we don't do it is because we lose our shirts every time we do a Saul Bass thing because he's too finicky. And so putting on my producer hat, I came up with a formula based on old paperwork that I saw Pac Title gave me on billings and things. And I said, what if we take the budget, double it, add a 10% contingency, double it, and add a 15% contingency with a $10,000 bonus on top of that? And they go, we're in. And oddly enough, that's what the job ended up costing. And we never told Saul because he would get irate. But we ran through, in those days, there's things called interpositive and internegatives, and you had to make all these things in order to do composites and stuff. We'd run through those IPs, interpositives, like crazy, and they're always having to remake them because there'd be a fleck of dust because we'd done 27 takes because the color was 1 point off here or that and this. And through the course of all that, the gentlemen that worked at the optical printer and the lineup and the negative cutter in-house, they let me stay and watch what they do and how they do it, and taught me how to do lineup sheets. And, I was very curious, and it was just fun because there's more buttons to push. And then what happened, much to my shock and surprise, is I got a phone call from somebody at Pac Title, and they said, hey, we need to know if you would go to this cutting room on this movie. They're in a lot of trouble and they can't quite figure it out. We think you can. And I went, I don't know what I'm doing. And they said, just go have a look. So I went to the cutting room and I looked at what the problem was, and it was an easy solve. And, we fixed it, and Pac Title was heroes. And then they started sending me out to all these movies in trouble. And then my reputation spread, and I would get calls from everybody that, this, that. And as I like to say, there's something great about being a fix-it guy, which is, if there's nothing wrong, you're congratulated for fixing something that never was broken. If there's something wrong and you can fix it, you're congratulated for fixing something. If there's something wrong and it can't be fixed, they go, well, thanks for letting us know. Now we don't have to chase this rabbit. So for 4 or 5 years, that's what I did. I was a fix-it guy. And, it all sort of came about because Saul did this commercial for Japan, and it was I forget, I think it was 104 layers deep, and there are no cuts. And Pac Title said it couldn't be done, and I came up with a really simple solution that said it could be done, and then they did it. And that's what gave him the confidence to send me out, because I knew how optical printers worked, and this worked and that worked.
What was the solution to do 140 layers then?
Well, the first thing is don't make IPs of everything because you can't afford it. So instead of using IPs, we use low contrast positive prints. And then what we did is we did, in a 6-head printer, we did 2 tri-packs, and we just, the exposures took forever. And then what that gave us is a way of breaking down the shots so that you'd have a 6-layer dissolve, that was only 2.5 seconds long, and then another 6 layer, and then another. And then you take those and make IPs of those, throw them in, and then you could just dissolve pieces. And when something was broken, or dirt, or the color wasn't right on one thing, it wasn't a redo of the whole thing. It was just a redo of a couple of seconds. So we broke it down that way, and it worked. And I wish I could remember the name of the commercial. It's online somewhere. But it's got all of Saul's classic, stuff. Bipack. He was a bipack, tripack, 6-pack, sepal pack idiot. We had a special mechanism made for the moviola so you could put 6 pieces of film in the gate at one time and it wouldn't rip it up. So you could see what it is. And we had a special bulb that, Saul would go, I need to see it needs to be brighter. And I'd go find somebody. And because of all these wacky errands, I got to know, like, everybody. And one of the highlights is, first off, I'm going to say something blasphemous. I was not a Star Wars fan. It was out for 6 weeks before I saw it. I refused to stand in line for anything. And so I eventually saw it, and I thought, well, it's a lovely thing. I really enjoyed it. It was fun, and I wasn't smart enough to know why. But Saul mentored George Lucas when George was at USC. So one of the things that was great about Saul is all these big-time directors would be dropping by. So you'd have Richard Brooks, Otto Preminger, Alfred Hitchcock, Irv Kirchner, George Lucas, and a slew of others. So I was always, I'm like the Lucy Ricardo, I'm just so impressed that they're there. It's like, can I get you some coffee, Mr. Kirchner, oh, call me, or yes, can I get you, and Saul's going, bring it down, man, I'll get yours. But so George arranged a tour of the Valjean facility, ILM at the time, that would soon become Apogee. And so we went out there, and George showed Saul around, and the producer showed me around. And it was a pretty amazing thing because, not that I knew who any of these people are, but I've seen photos since, like Richard Edlund on his knees shooting the crawl, the opening crawl. They had this giant dish starfield with a motion control camera that's moving all over, and I'm watching it. They're showing dailies that have Phil Tippett in them, and he's animating the chess game. And out in the parking lot, they have the alley run, and they have a ship tied up to an old red Ford pickup truck, and they're pulling it on a wire, and it's blowing up, and it's very unimpressive looking, but you're going, wow. And then on another stage, like I said, I didn't know at the time, it was Grant McCune, and he's walking around with an X-Wing fighter and a sand, machine, and I put Saul back in the car when we were finished. George took us up to the loft, which was this room up top that had a player piano in it, an old beat-up couch, and a really stained rug. And he showed us the trailer before it came out.
Oh, wow.
And I was blown away by it. And we're driving home, and Saul goes, well, I don't get it. What's the big deal? And I go, well, have you ever seen a model do that move before so convincingly? Have you ever seen, it's like they could do multi-passes with the motion control. And, he has all that, showed you the footage of the World War II fight cut together. And then we saw the X-Wing fighters, doing that. And these guys are hand animated. He's got it all under one roof. It's an amazing thing. And so I was like, I don't get it. And, And then Saul went to the Academy Awards with George. So that was exciting for me because they came by in their tuxedos and they came by afterwards in their tuxedos. And I had assumed that George would have an Oscar with him, and he didn't.
Annie Hall, wasn't it, instead?
Yeah, I was so disappointed that he didn't have the Oscar with him. Anyway, I prepared a little celebratory thing that nobody ever saw or got to eat. And and that's sort of the long version of how I got into visual effects. It's nothing I ever intended to do. But apparently Saul trained me, or I have that kind of mind where I see the puzzle problems and I figured out ways to put together. And then in my later career, I'm very used to people, including my own producer, going, well, this isn't going to work. And just going, it will work. And just to share with you the thing that I hate the most is that I hate people that say, oh, I know it's going to work. And I knew it. I was never worried and I had no anxiety or whatever. When somebody said it wasn't going to work, I would have a lot of upset stomachs. And they're going, it's going to work, it's going to work, it's going to work. And 99% of the time that it did work, much to everybody's surprise, including mine. I guess it's a stubborn streak in me, but it's fun. That's the only reason I do this, is it's fun.
It sounds like a lot of the other people that I've spoken to, like Ken Ralston and Dennis Murin, you're problem solvers first and foremost. And you mentioned a couple of times where you were put in positions where you said, I don't know what I'm doing. Was there ever a point where you thought, I know what I'm doing, or do you always relish that kind of challenge ahead of you, like that thing that everyone's saying can't be done?
Well, I like what Rob Legato told me one time. He goes, if I'm in the zone where I'm confident and I know what I'm doing, then I'm not doing it right. So there's some things where you know what you're doing, but you can't do it that way because of a DP or a schedule or money or whatever it is, and you're forced to do things you know how to do in different ways. And what that's all about, to me, is without having learned the history firsthand of how things were done in the photochemical days, and then, in my own way, studying in-camera stuff, like taking a photograph and sticking it to a piece of glass and then shooting through it to people far away with a big depth of field. So the scales, like my friend Larry Starkman, who taught me this stuff, he did a short film on giant hot dogs on the beach. And he showed it to me, and I was like, how did you do that? And he pulled out a piece of glass with photos of hot dogs on it, because this is how to do it. So, and then, when ILM moved up north and Apogee was there, because I knew where it was, I used to hang out there all the time. And just down the block was Illusion Arts with Sid Dutton and Bill Taylor, and you go over there. And Sid and Bill would teach you about hanging miniatures and matte paintings and double exposures with this. So it's like I was lucky to have a very thorough, exciting education. And that's what I live for nowadays, because everybody knows how to do what we do. It's mostly about controlling their expectations because they don't know how to do what they do. You can read an article, doesn't mean you know how to do it, and it doesn't mean they're telling the truth. One of the issues that I had with Cinefex magazine is every story read in the same rhythm, which is, I was hired to do this job. I proposed this thing. Everybody loved it. They gave me all the time I needed. We put it together, and everybody loved it. And when they came to me, I said, if you're going to do that kind of article, you don't need me. Just write it yourself. I go, I want to talk about, this was on Stargate. I said, I want to talk about how I got fired twice. I want to talk about how we couldn't figure this out, how this accident happened that made this thing work. I want to talk about the anxiety of running up against a deadline and we still didn't have the solution. And, those are the interesting things, is how did you deal with the impossible, or what felt impossible at the time? So when people write these magazine stories today, they only write about the successes. They don't write about the failures. And as such, directors and producers and cameramen all just think they know how to do it, and it's like I recently worked on something where the cinematographer who became the DP did not believe in green or blue screens. He believed in roto. And I'm going, yes, we can do that, but it'll cost more, take more time, and it's not going to look as good. Why don't we just do it right? And, that's more of what you're dealing with these days, is educating somebody on the whys of it. People come to me and they go, well, AI can do this. And you go, yes, with a lot of back and forth and, this and that, and so on and so forth. Right now, I'm working on something with, I guess I'm allowed to say, I don't know if I signed a non-disclosure, with the Cosmo people. And there's AI, a lot of AI involved in this. And, we're trailblazing because, Cosmos talks a lot. There is no 5-second take in Cosmos. Everything is a minute. AI can't do a minute. It could only do 10 seconds. So how do you get this 10-second clip and this 10-second clip to overlap seamlessly so you can join them together? So when AI is creating stuff, it doesn't do that, because next time you hit the button, instead of this, it does that, this. And then you go, well, here's the branches of a tree. They're like that. But then next time they're like that. And you go, it doesn't work. So we're problem solving those things. I'm out of my depth, but it's where I like to be. And it's very exciting. But everybody buys, producers, directors, DPs, AI. Well, AI can do it. I'm metahumans. I don't need to use, my actors. I had a director come to me and he goes, let's do this all with metahumans. And I'm going, okay. So it's an 8-page fight between 5 people that starts in a room, goes off a balcony, lands in a swimming pool, and then does an underwater fight for a couple of minutes. The complexity of putting that together versus shooting actors, second unit, and it always comes down to money. What does it cost to do it with a metahuman and, a procedural water, or if specialized water? Is it motion capture? Are we going to keyframe it? There's so many questions. And then, of course, they always go, well, I want it next week. And you go, well, that ain't going to happen. But you can't say... Has this changed, though, really? If we take you back to, 1983, 1984 for Last Starfighter, or 93, 94 for Stargate, you were still coming up against massive obstacles for things that hadn't been done before, figuring out what could be done with what was available and trying to kind of push the boundaries of what was possible at the time. Did that feel different back then to you as it does now in terms of people's expectations? Yeah, because literally back then, I didn't have people saying to me, well, it's simple. You know how to do this. We just... Right. We'll just do... the computer will kick it out. Just have the computer kick it out. Just hit the button. Flip the keyboard over, hit the do it right button, and then turn it on its side and hit the do it fast button. We know they're there. So the expectations are now more difficult to manage. So you're acting as not as only as an artist and technician, but as a diplomat in some ways, trying to kind of navigate your way politically. It's really more that, because these days it's about scripts have great visions, directors have enlarged those visions, DPs have great ideas on how to shoot something, but then there's a budget, and then, you don't want to be the guy that's always going, well, we can't afford that, lock that camera off and put that blue screen there, and, and let's not have that explosion, but, we could do, you want to be the guy that goes, okay, I'll figure this out. But at the same time, that self-injures us, because none of these people are in the trenches in post. When you think about a DP, he does what he does. He figures it all out. He figures the palette, and figures we'll have this equipment and that equipment, and then he has to be beat up by the producers because it's too much equipment, too many lights. So you know. And then he shoots it, and then he's climbed his mountain, and now he's waiting for the DI. He doesn't see that we just threw out 90% of what he just did because we can't use it. So thank goodness we LiDAR'd the set, and we did photo reference on the whole thing, and textured the whole thing, and scanned the actors, you know, and this and that and that, and blah, 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 blah. They don't see that pain, and the director doesn't see that pain. What the director sees is, why is this taking so long? And then when you give them the credits, they go, why are there so many people? You know, because I only see 3 people on set. Why do you have 3,000 or 300 or whatever they're doing? So we've done ourselves a great disservice because we're such fans that we keep the process invisible. Then we lie in articles and only talk about all the positiveness of it. And then you're faced on set. Like I remember when Dennis Muren did War of the Worlds, and the PR was about, we had 10 weeks to do the entire visual effects on the thing. And then everybody after that, when they come to, they go, well, they did War of the Worlds in 10 weeks. You know, why can't you, you know, do this? Why is it going to take 6 months with these 3 CG creatures interacting with these, you know, why? And you go, well, A, you can't afford ILM, you know, B, are you going to accept what they accepted, or are you going to, this is a great thing, is that I once had a director, this is a big difference from the old days too, because digitally, when you're showing stuff, it'll loop forever. So I had this director, and we were fixing all the prosthetics, which turns into actor replacement because they didn't like any of the prosthetics, and the prosthetics got nominated, by the way, that year, even though I'd replaced them all. And we had this one little 3-second shot, and it's looping and it's looping and it's looping. And then after about 2 minutes, I go, well, I guess that this is a final. And he goes, no. Yeah, looping. 5 minutes gone by, and I go, so are we good here? And he goes, let it just keep looping. I'll find something wrong. You know, it's like back in the old days with film, the film would shred. You only had so many times you'd build a film loop with 5 takes of it and splice them together and put them on trees. It'd go through the projector, and after about a minute, everything would shred. And you go, so what did you think? But that's the problem, is that there's a lot of misinformation about how hard it is to do what we do and how long it takes to do it. And there's a lot of comparison to you know, this guy did it in 10 weeks, and there's like 8 million shots in it. And look at them, you know, their entire city building and world building and creatures, you know, and you just go, yeah. The latest one, what's the name of that movie that came out last year with the AI kid where you could see through his head?
The Creator?
The Creator, yeah. The latest one was The Creator. And everybody's going, well, you know, they shot that in 3 weeks, and they did this, and they did that. And again, you don't want to be the negative guy, but you do want to find out what's going on. So I found out what's going on, and the answer is, yeah, they did it in 6 weeks or whatever it is. But they planned for 3 years, and they did previs of every single shot, and they built all the assets ahead of time. And the director said, this is what I want, and didn't change his mind. And, you know, it's like, yeah, those are a lot of things. It's like one of the biggest things I run into these days with LED walls is directors don't want to make their minds up. They go, well, can't you just, you know, well, let's make like 5 versions, and I'll pick from that on the day. And you go, it doesn't really work like that. You want to pay for that? No. We're not using it. I shouldn't have to pay for it. You know, and it's like LED walls is taking post and putting it in pre. And if people planned really well and don't change their mind, it's magnificent. I have another director friend of mine, and he just goes, look, I'm going to do something. That's why we're not going to shoot on a wall, because I'll either want to slip the sync or put a different scene back there, you know, or, you know, the effects are going to evolve as they go on, and I can't really wrap my head around it before shooting. So he goes, I don't want an LED wall. And I'm going, well, what if we just build what you want? We'll shoot it at 48 frames a second, and every other frame will be green, and then we de-interleave them. So if I need mats, I've got mats, but you at least have the character with interactive lighting on them.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
And so he's tried it, and it worked out when he
really, yeah,
slip sync a lot,
But there's this expectation, isn't there, that a certain technique, I guess, is going to be some sort of panacea, like whether it's the LED walls, whether it's like face replace AI stuff, or whether it's the green screen or the blue screen back in the day. There seems to be that kind of expectation it's just going to tick all boxes. But ultimately, these are all tools, right? And you have to find the right one for the right time.
There's a secret to the whole thing, which is what you learn from magic when you're doing magic, is you don't want to use the same thing over and over and over again. The audience will catch on to it. So what are the various tools? But the director or the producer goes, we're going to do this way. And you go, but, we could, yeah. Anyway, so it becomes a really fun, creative process, especially when you're working with collaborative people and you can bounce ideas around. And before you know it, you end up with stuff that's far better than what you thought you were going to be able to do. And it's a love fest. And there's no hate in the room, and and with a good visual effects producer who's handling the money. And what I think visual effects producers' job is these days is to manage expectations.
Yeah.
As opposed to, they have to track all the costs and notify everybody and all that stuff. But if they manage expectations properly, when they add the $8 million extra to the feature visual effects budget, nobody's shocked. They had it in reserve or whatever it is. As you were about to say.
Yeah, and also I was thinking, back when you were doing something like Stargate, for instance, there wasn't that big a crew on the visual effects crew. I mean, you look now on the credits and literally hundreds of people go by from different continents across the world. Do you think that it's become very difficult to kind of manage that singular vision that the director has, given that there are so many vendors involved these days?
No, I find it easy. But that said, I'll go back to the fact that I've never worked for a visual effects company. I've always been an independent supervisor. And early on in my career, I discovered the more vendors I hire, the less likely somebody's going to be able to bottle up my pipeline. And that when a shot is going south, I have options to dual track it and let this vendor keep working on it and this vendor work on it too, and the best will be what it is. So given that, like on could have been Long Kiss Goodnight, I think I had 12 or 13 different vendors working on the show. And when I did, I got called in on Fantastic Four at Fox to help when they got into trouble. So one of my vendors was in San Francisco. I had another vendor somewhere else, and so back in those days, it was about hopping on a plane. So I'd go up to San Francisco every Wednesday, have my meetings there, then I'd fly to the next place directly from there, which was somewhere cold. I can't remember, probably Seattle. So Thursday was those guys, then Friday was back to the cutting room, to talk about everything that we did, and then Monday was the local company. Tuesday was organization day. So now that we have Zoom, I hate it with all my heart, but it makes all this much more doable. And what I hate about it is that back in the day, boy, I'm sounding old, but back in the day, you would be in a room with all the artists. And so you could talk directly to the artist. And, I think my career is a lot based on the fact that I could say to an artist, look, this is the minimum of what it is I need you to do. If you have a better idea, do that as well. And many times artists would come up with really great solutions, and I would present them, and the directors would go, wow, this is great. I go, oh, yeah, it's Joni over at CIS, or it's this came up with this idea, and so sharing the credit is a valuable thing. Now you're pretty much like we are. It's like, I don't know how many people you have behind you helping with this, podcast. When I talk to a vendor,
No.
sometimes they put all the people in the room, but they're so small, I can't really see them and interact with them, and they speak a foreign language, and some of the jokes don't work. So, and jokes, warm up the room and loosen people up and allow for people to say things. And at a lot of companies, especially the Indian companies, I find that they don't even do group dailies. That, the supervisor looks at it and then he sends everything, out. And I find when you get all the different departments in for group dailies, it's like on one show we had a water problem going on, and we were having a really rough time with this shot. And another person who was in the room goes, "Wait a minute, I'm doing something just like that on another show. Let me have a crack at it," And so you get this synergy, and the Zoom call meeting kind of loses that. This becomes a little bit less personal and more formal, and it's harder to gauge the reactions of people, because like for all I know, you've got a guy sitting right over to your left. Yeah, and they're going, I don't know what's going on in your environment. So I just find it easy to organize, easy to keep the look and everything the same because of the past experience about, you learn how to break up shots based on what the strengths and weaknesses are, and you go, oh, this company would be great for this, and then you share your look files, and your references and things like that. And I don't find that a problem. I always enjoy it. I just wish that we could fly. I wish we could teleport and be in the rooms with these people.
Yeah, I feel the same. I used to travel for my work, and now I do it all remotely from a hub here in the UK, and it's not the same. It's just not the same. Having breakfast with people and just talking something over, and having meetings in person, like you say. Is there a director that you worked with over the years that you felt a kind of synergy with in terms of their understanding of what you were trying to achieve together and your place in achieving that, and their role, understanding the sort of delineation between you two?
Well, a lot of them for different reasons. One of them is Brannon Braga, who, Star Trek fame and Cosmos and everything, is that Brannon is such a fan of films that we had a language we developed. And I went to him, on Cosmos season 3, and we had a giant dinosaur sequence, but no money, and I go, we could do it. I'll find a way to do it, but it's not going to be as dynamic and look as good as it'll look more like, National Geographic Channel, and Brandon would just go, let's cut the sequence.
Huh.
And so you go, well, can you do that? Because he's a writer. He goes, yeah, watch this. And he would, change it to something else. I remember I said to him, I go, look, we could do it really well if we put the forest and fog in their silhouettes. Then we can, do something nice. But he didn't want to do that. Another director is Albert Hughes, who I did Alpha with. If you haven't seen Alpha, I think it's some of the best work I've ever done, and it's a great story. A troubled project because of personalities outside my level, which is why it didn't get a big release like it should have. But Albert was a lot like Saul Bass. And it was really great because he had a specific point of view with what things should look like, graphically speaking, and I tuned into that, and it was just fun. And we played off of each other, and we were able to build some really interesting, beautiful sequences. It wasn't a tough film in terms of creativity. It was a tough film in terms of what you get for your money, because we had a lot of CG handoffs, and fixes on a wolf that didn't look enough wolf-like, and
Right.
and then the studio got involved and said, no, we want it to be more Disney-like, and it's like, no, the whole point of the movie is an interesting movie because Albert wrote
Yeah,
it.
I've not seen it.
It's great. It's a twofer in that it's a coming-of-age story, and it explains how we ended up with dogs, and it's set 20,000 years ago, and stars Cody Smith McPhee, who's a big actor now. Anyway, and Albert wrote it so that you wouldn't need dialogue because nobody knows what language this tribe of people spoke. So he had a person from the London Natural History Museum come over and give us the phonetic language of what it's likely to have been. And the studio came in and goes, well, we don't understand a word they're saying. And you go, you don't have to, because look at the picture, you know. And they dubbed in a narrator, and they had voiceovers and stuff. But if you turn the sound down, the movie is magnificent. And then they came in and recut it a little bit, depending. They released 4 different versions of it. It was a huge hit in China, but they took the action sequence. It's not an action movie, and they put it up front, and then they play it again at the end of Act 1, cut for cut, which we never understood. But anyway, so Albert was great. Sometimes you work with directors who have no clue about visual effects, and they're fun, like Barry Levinson. When we did Sphere with him, he was just so open and collaborative to ideas, and he'd set aside time. And, he said to me early on, he goes, look, I don't want to see how the sausage is made. Just make me a really tasty sausage, would you? And we did. We had a lot of fun on that film. So, and then Roland was a lot of fun back then in Stargate because Roland didn't believe in visual effects. He definitely didn't believe in computers. And I had to do all these tests to prove to him that computers can do things. And, I think, I don't know if he'll remember this now. He's growing so great. Hey, Roland. He came over for dinner one night, and I barbecued chicken, and I served him this ashen, smoking Hulk. Anyway, but they made a lot of miniatures, and second unit shot a lot of miniatures of the gliders. And there was this shot that they wanted, and I said, no, we'll do it CG. And he goes, yeah, it's not going to work. And I said, it'll work. And he goes, it's not going to work. We're not going to do that. We're going to send out and shoot miniatures again. And so my crew, which was called Kleiser-Walzak back then, with Jeff Kleiser and Diana Walzak. It was their company. They got the job. They hired me. And then the crew was like 6 people to do the entire show. 7 people. Frank Vitz was inventing stuff on the fly while we were doing it. And the compositing folks were inventing everything. We were all inventing stuff. But we had Jeff Williams, who you look up Jeff Williams. He's a super smart guy, and he hand built the glider in his own spare time, and he put together the shot, and he showed it to me, and I was blown away because he did such a great model. And I said, but unfortunately, and I took him down to the screening room and showed him the miniature that they had shot. I go, what do you see? We see no detail. We see no color. It's basically a black blur. I go, so make your beautiful ship a black blur. And so he did, and we put the shot together, and then we called Roland in and said, Roland, you got to look at this piece of film. And we showed it to him, and he goes, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. See, second unit, the miniatures are the way to go. I go, it's the CG. This is all CG. Come upstairs and look at it. And it was from that moment on that Roland goes, okay. Wow. So computers can work, and he offered me. He and Dean said, "Do you want to be the head of the new company we're going to start?" And I said no. Said, you don't want to start a visual effects company. You'll lose your shirt. If you're doing other people's projects, fine. But if you do your own, not so good. So they started Centropolis without me, which is another dumb decision on my part.
That Stargate felt like it sort of really pushed the boundaries and kind of opened the door to more technically demanding science fiction films. I remember seeing that trailer for the first time and kind of going, "Oh wow, this is something new." Do you feel like that it's a milestone in visual effects history in a way?
Well, it should be. It is a good story. It was well acted, and everything we did hadn't been done yet. I mean, when you think about the morphs, you know, there was no morphing software. It was all hand done by Ed, and you know, he bought a package that claimed to be a morphing package that just was a disaster. It was a 2D thing, and we had to do 3D stuff. And Ed found a way to make this work right at the last second. Got fired over that. But you know, and it was a good coming together of old world and new world, because, you know, the miners, we had 500 miners. We didn't really have to duplicate them, even though we did. The exodus across the desert is actually sticks with rags on them, with a styrofoam wig head on the top of the stick, you know, and so we had live people foreground, and then it trailed off to them. So there was a lot of tricks used, and the production design on it was really good. Holger did a great job on that, and those were really enjoyable special times. And it was a kind of show when you would fly into the location to do your shot and fly out. It wasn't the kind of show that you lived on. So we could get a lot done, and I'd fly out and go, Roland, look at this. So it was fun. And Roland, so those are my favorite directors.
When you work with Rennie Harlin, I understand you helped craft that surprise shark attack for Samuel Jackson on Deep Blue Sea. What was what happened there? Was that something? Did I read something about Samuel wasn't happy with the scene or happy with the dialogue, and you came up with the idea? Is that right?
He came up with the idea.
Right.
It was my third film in a row with Sam, and we ran into each other, or he called me up one night, and he goes, "Did you read what we're shooting tomorrow?" And I said, "Yeah, I read it." I go, "It's 8 pages of the worst dialogue I've ever heard in my life." And he goes, "You should just kill me." And I said, "If you get to the front of the moon pool, I will kill you." And so, you know, I've told the story many times, but Rennie wasn't in on it. I went up to Rennie in the morning. I did say, "Hey, Rennie, you know, Sam doesn't really want to do this," and asked me to kill him. And he goes, "We're not killing him. He's the star of the movie. You don't kill the star of the movie." So, all right, whatever you want. But Sam would do take one, and he starts way back with the little bubble sub, and he has to walk over it and around the pool and come up, you know, and he did it in 3 lines, which I think were, you know, there was 12 of us on that mountain and only 8 of us left. And if you think water's fast, you should see snow. And he was in position, you know, and cut, you know. He goes, "Yeah, Sam, we got, 6.5, 7 more pages to go. You need to take your time and explore." And he'd just do it time and again. And Rennie got very frustrated with the whole thing. And then we're in cutting, and we previewed the film with Sam saying the whole thing, and got horrible test results. And so they fired the editor, or the editor quit, or something happened, and they brought on Frank Uriosity, who was the staff big shot editor at Warner Brothers. And Frank looked at it. He goes, "This is a terrible scene." He goes, "What do we do?" And I go, "Use take one." He goes, "Use take one and we'll kill him." And so Frank goes, "Can we do that?" And I go, "I can do that. We're all set. I shot all the elements." So I did it, and the audience went crazy. It's the most gratifying scene ever. Sam called me up. He goes, "Best death ever." Rennie called me up, said things I can't repeat. But it was fun because we were doing something that was going to make a difference. It was, you don't do that. That's
No.
not in the middle of a speech, and if you read the
It's
original,
what everybody remembers about that movie. Like, it's the first thing that comes to mind. I saw it in '99, so 26 years ago now, and that's what I remember of that movie.
Well, it's a nice scene. I really enjoyed making it. Thad Bear did the work on it over at Hammerhead, which was obviously I had to hire Hammerhead because it's a shark movie, and they named themselves after a shark. But we couldn't get it to look right. It kept looking to me like the whale in that Disney cartoon that's singing, the Italian opera with the frilled collar. And it just, if you look at it frame by frame, you go, well, that doesn't really work. But, we did everything we could. We shook the camera, and Thad goes, "Let's hit the lens with blood." And I go, "All right, hit the lens with blood." And we made it work. But we had a huge problem. I don't have the model with me, but I do have this from that very same film, which is the parrot being eaten by the shark.
Oh, yeah.
But if you look at the shark's mouth, the shark can't grab somebody because the mouth is way back here on a shark. So we kept going, well, I'll have him go sideways and grab him, and it's like, no, I really didn't like that. I have him come over like that, and then no, that's too awkward. We don't, this. So we finally worked it out, and then we put it together. And the studio, loved the scene, that they decided, okay, let's gild the lily. And so I said, "What's that mean?" And they go, "After he's pulled down, let's have the two baby sharks come in and pull him apart." And I go, "Great, let's do it. Sounds fun." So that's how we killed Sam.
Yeah. And I'm sure that has had an impact on just audience expectations and how films are made since, because we don't expect the big name to die, but it has happened since. Not to the same the same extent that this shocked everyone at the time. You clearly have a sense of humor with your work, and I understand you like to insert little Easter eggs as well. Is that the frustrated comedian in you?
Yeah. That all started when we were doing The Last Starfighter, and which was a film I was called in to fix. And the director, Nick Castle, who I love to work with, by the way, just doesn't work anymore. He makes more money being the Shape in Halloween. But that's a whole other story. See, I think you could see right there's a little bit of the Shape falling over sideways. But anyway,
yeah.
He signed it. Nick and I are good friends. I don't forgot what I was going to say.
About the Easter egg in Last Starfighter.
Yeah. So Nick Castle, the director, used to call the studio guys Gumbies because they are all like the Gumby cartoons, and they'd walk around there. And so Nick goes, "Let's put some Gumbies on the spaceship." And so we redesigned the spaceship to have the outline of Gumbies all over it. And so nobody's ever said anything about the Gumbies. So on the next film, I went, well, how far can I go with this? So I started thinking about moose. I think moose are funny. So I would put moose in unexpected places in various films. And then I would show the director. I go, "Look, I put a moose over there. Is that okay? Can we leave it?" He goes, "What's the moose for?" And I go, "It's funny." It's an Easter egg. Nobody will know. It's a moose. So no, they usually would let me keep it in, and then moose became penguins. So and I got really really bold on a Cameron Crowe movie with the moose. We put moose antlers on a horse in a gas station. It's just there. Nobody said a word about it. Cameron says, okay. But it was really big. It wasn't hidden in a corner. It was like here. So in the next film, I put penguins in it, and I put them really big, and they like walk across the frame. And they were overly bright. I couldn't get the vendor to tone them down, and we couldn't do it in the DI in those days. And nobody said anything about it. So I started putting more and more things in. And then I found the UCLA study on the gorilla playing basketball, which if you haven't seen it, have a look at it. It explains why you can do this stuff and nobody sees it.
I was just thinking that very thing when you were talking about the penguins. Yeah.
So I see how far I can get it, and I've lost a job over it. I got interviewed for Green Hornet. Yeah, the Green Hornet. And the director, I said, I like to sneak things in, and he got outraged. He just said, how dare you, And I go, no, it's fun, and if you don't approve it, I won't do it, but I always do it. No, you cannot do this. This is not this sacrilege. You don't do that. Anyway,
well, I didn't get a bullet with that movie anyway.
Well, I didn't get a call back on it. And one of the things I find is that if you're working correctly, meaning the collaboration and flow is casual and more deep, that you can sometimes affect the outcome of a movie. Like, Rennie and I used to collaborate, although I don't know if he would agree with that, but you go, you really shouldn't shoot a scene like this. Can you just move the camera over there and place them, or, and a lot of that happens in pre-production, and nowadays you do it with previs, and, you build it. The last thing I did, they would do storyboards, but they wouldn't share them. So I did my own previs, and I would show it to them, and then we would shoot stuff, and they go, well, we never saw your previs, and then you pull it up and you go, look, it's shooting it cut for cut. Coincidence. Great minds think alike, but I think it's really good. So, it makes it easier, and then, when you get a reputation such as it is, it makes it easier to approach the director and go, look, I just put 4 penguins really big. like on Blood Diamond, they're evacuating Freetown, and they're coming across the frame in a huge diagonal line with a village burning way in the background. But right here is a family of 4 penguins, really big. And I showed it to Ed, and I go, I put those there. And I go, here's a version without them, and he goes, well, they're too big. And I said, well, let's see. I go, invite some people in from the office here, and let's see if they see. So we invited people in, and nobody saw the penguins. So Ed finally goes, fine, if it'll make you happy, keep your damn penguins.
It sounds like there's a YouTube video waiting to be made of all of your penguins collated in one place.
At some point.
One of the other strings to your, many strings to your bow, is the VES, the Visual Effects Society, when you chaired that for a while and kind of advocated for, workers in the industry, better conditions. Was that something that was really important to you at the time, having, seen what you'd seen over those decades?
It's still important.
Yeah.
The problem is that VES isn't the organization to affect that kind of change. I don't know if you know it, but back in the late 80s, I tried to get a visual effects guild going, and I met with the unions, and they really didn't want anything to do with it, and they said, oh, you should, go talk to the TV guys, because you're really, tape operators is more it's more of a tape operating kind of thing, what you do. And then I tried again in the early 90s. And then when this whole industry went global, I was like, well, I don't know what to do. And then the union came to me when I was chair of the VES and said, we want a visual effects union. So we put together a secret group of influential visual effects and special effects people.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked with IATSE to try to get them to do it the way we wanted it done. And after a year or two, we ended up just going our separate ways because effectively what they wanted to do would have gotten everybody fired. And it wasn't going to bring about the change that we wanted. At one point, Local 600, which is photographers, cinematographers, came to us and said, we'll take everybody in the VES into our unit. And we met with them. Bob Coleman was our treasurer at the time. And we met with them, and Bob asked the question that broke the bank, which is, so you're going to waive all fees and waive all dues until you actually can represent us? And they went, no, there's still going to be an entrance fee and you're still going to have to pay dues. And we said, well, when will you be able to represent us? And they go, oh, well, it could take 20 years. There's a whole process and people are going to have to sign these cards and this and that, blah, 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 blah. And so we essentially, it's a hard thing to say. We essentially said, our deal is you let us in, no entrance fees, no dues, until such a point as you can actually represent us. Otherwise, you're just taking our money and we're not getting any benefit from it. And, when you think about unionization, which is what would have worked, when you're a union, you get a pension plan, you get a health plan, there's a place to go if you're working, more than, 80 billion hours a day when you don't, and it's what we need. And the problem now in 2024 is that the industry's global. The union is local. And until there's a world union, all that's going to happen is, in my opinion, is that will be more people. If you want a job, you're going to have to go to another country. That there'll be less and less, and it's certainly not going to make it any more competitive. It'll make it less competitive. And with the tax incentives that people are offering, we're already the migrant film workers, and we travel to where it is. I haven't shot anything in Los Angeles since one sequence in Cameron Crowe's movie Elizabethtown, and before that, Stargate. So it's a rough thing. And the other problem that's very disconcerting to me is because we have gone out of our way to sell the equipment as what does the work, the software, the computer processor, this and that, because the perception of producers and directors and production managers is, well, I have a computer.
Yeah.
I hit the button. So if you don't want to hit the button, I'll find somebody else to hit the button. And we've really sold ourselves short. And I always like to do the comparison with the directors of photography is you never hear them going, oh, I shot it with a Panavision Gold Star camera. What you hear is John Toll shot this movie. And John Toll did this, and John Toll did this. And they sell their artistry so that names like Billy Friedkin and John Toll and Michael Goy and all these people. I like a game, and I'm as guilty as the next person failing at this. But so who won the Oscar last year for visual effects?
I know it wasn't the creator because I remember following that, and I've forgotten who it was now.
Right. And
There's your point. Yeah.
yeah, that's the point. I don't even care what film. Who are the four people that won it?
Yeah.
See, we're not selling our artistry. We're selling our equipment. And as such, it's not like, oh, the best artists are in LA. What they hear is, oh, the best computers are up in wherever ILM is these days. Or New Zealand. If I need monkeys, I need to go to New Zealand. That doesn't matter that all the artists that did that left the company and moved somewhere else. So I follow artists. I don't follow companies, and it's very hard because the artists are what used to be a very small group of practitioners has now blossomed into thousands. And as such, our job has become more of a factory job. And they don't see the faces and the fingers. They just see, here's the assembly line. It's got all those computers and processors on it. And that's not a good thing for us.
It was Godzilla -1.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And there's only 3 people and 1 special effects guy. Can you name any of them? One of them was the director.
No, I can't at this point. Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, that was probably the first time in a number of years, though, that I'd actually seen the faces of the winners. Because the other thing is the broadcast of the Academy Awards, sound editing gets removed from the broadcast to catch up with the delay, to meet the specific window of time that needs to be broadcast. Editing gets cut, visual effects gets cut. But that was one time I did see the faces of the people involved. So maybe there is a small positive to be had there.
Well, thus the Visual Effects Society. That's all I could say, is that when we designed the award show, when I created the award show under duress from those, it's a whole other story to that. But anyway, the whole point of the award show is to recognize and honor and to be able to publish these names and get press coverage and all that stuff. And, when you think about the categories the Visual Effects Society honors right now, there's 25 of them. I left the committee after 9 years or something, and they've expanded their things, and they're handing awards out for some things that some people find a little odd. But at the end of every award season, we always get requests for, why don't we have a motion capture award? Why don't we have an editing award? Why don't we have a previs award? All I can say is when I first presented the awards to the board, under Jim Morris was the chair, I had 84 awards. We covered all that. The board voted it down, saying that the award show itself would take 3 days at that rate. Considering it takes 2.5 to 3 hours to hand out 25 awards, 84 awards, that's nobody wants that. So the awards does what it's supposed to do, but we as practitioners need to take the start and talk about it, meaning you need to say people's names. It's like, it becomes very political because you don't want to look weak in front of somebody that's hiring you. But it would be like, it's like, oh, if I could only get Mitch Drain, I could knock out these 64 shots because he's an excellent artist. If I could only get the Clavadier brothers, But we don't do that. We just go, well, CineSite did this. Maybe we can, hire CineSite, But meanwhile, nobody's there anymore. So...
Well, I feel like I'm doing my little bit, Jeff, with my podcast because I put people's names and their faces forefront. Tomorrow I'm speaking to Pablo Hellman, and then I'm speaking to Stephen King and Rob Coleman, and I've spoken to Nilo Rodis and, a whole bunch of people. I think, some podcasts, they put the movie up front. They say, so-and-so worked on this movie. I don't do that, actually, and I'm probably suffering for that fact. But I do like to sort of point to the artistry of people rather than the film itself and, the umbrella that they worked under.
Yeah, well, tell Pablo I said hey.
Will do.
But the problem is, when you think back on it, we know the whole league group. We know, Dykstra, Murin, Ralston, Edlin, and Tippett.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next generation is like Rob Legato, me, Pablo, most of the visual effects supervisors at ILM. But anyway, it's hard to get down into the weeds. It's hard to go after the artist. But again, if you go back to let me tell you an imperfect story instead of a perfect story, then you can have an artist and he could show you, look at what they shot. Never mind why they shot it, which is a whole other thing. Look how I figured out how to do this. So the artists are doing what we used to do, And one of the things, as an aside, that the artists seem to like is they love my war stories as to why I did not shoot it correctly, And you go, well, we did the best we could, but unfortunately, they dropped the camera in the sand and we didn't have a thing, and the sun was setting behind the dune and we had to get the shot. So I grabbed this other camera and we handheld it on this tripod because we didn't have time to do that. So we're lucky we got it at all. And they're going, well, I got to stabilize it, and then I got to do this, that, and it's like, yeah, you're doing all the great stuff that I was supposed to do because I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. But that's like a whole show, is like iconic shots from various movies. How did they really happen? I don't want to hear, Rob had this great idea and then he tested it and it worked perfectly and everything happened and it was nice. And it was, as a compositor, all I had to do was hit the button and watch it come together. It's like, there's some stories out there that will, and producers and DPs and directors need to understand this in order for them to really buy into helping us help them. And sometimes we have that. Sometimes, like Albert and Brannon and even Roland, even though he does these sequences nobody can shoot anything on anymore, but so, they do the stuff. And by the way, my favorite kind of visual effects, it isn't the Marvel watch me create a universe, even though some of the work in that is stunningly beautiful. My favorite stuff, because remember I started as a magician, is the invisible visual effect that looks like there's no visual effects in this project. That's where it gets exciting for me. But I love to do the giant thing every now and again because I really like giant explosions. And so does Rennie Harlan.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jeff Okun there. I just love his blend of deep technical knowledge, problem-solving spirit, and that totally irreverent sense of humour. From working under Saul Bass to Samuel L. Jackson getting eaten mid-monologue, it's clear that Jeff had a hand in some iconic moments, often in ways we never knew about without a podcast like this one. And that's exactly what this podcast is here for, a sort of oral history in a way of behind-the-scenes unsung heroes. Pulling back that curtain to celebrate the creativity, the chaos as well, and the craft behind those movies we love. Coming up on the podcast, I've got chats lined up with a director, a concept artist, some more VFX folks, and also Walter Murch coming up soon as well. My friend Dave Barkley, puppeteer, has just released a book as well, and I've got him on the podcast. It's already recorded. That'll be coming up in the next few weeks. And I'll also be writing some more pieces for ILM and Skywalker Sound, which I'll keep you posted about in the show notes and on my link tree, and I'll talk about those in forthcoming episodes. Also, keep an eye out for some special episodes later in April. My pal, Rachel, will be sending back reports from Star Wars Celebration Japan, which I'll be dropping in as bonus episodes here on the feed. I can't be there myself, sadly, work commitments, but Rachel's going to capture the vibe for us. I'll be out in Vegas just before that. I'm going to work for one of my clients at the big show out there, NAB, demonstrating some of their kit. So if you're at NAB, I know some of you are in the industry, come along to the EVS broadcast booth and say hi. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you can join me next time on the Filmumentaries podcast.
Now, you've seen how bad things can get and how quick they can get that way. Well, they can get a whole lot worse. So we're not going to fight anymore. We're going to pull together and we're going to find a way to get out of here. First, we're going to seal off this movie.
This podcast is produced, edited, and presented by Jamie Benning. Music is by Michael Hewitt Brown of MB Music. Thanks for listening.
We are being way media.